Hello, church family. Asa here. Just wanted to share a few thoughts with you today. We're here at the Honey Creek Farms that belongs to the Burrows family, and I'm thankful that they've allowed us to come and have a few moments with you here. I always love hearing the post-resurrection stories in the Eastertide series, and this year it skips one of my favorite stories in the lectionary. It's the story, the last story in the Gospel of John. And one of my favorite sermons on this story was preached by Charles Maynard when he was my district superintendent. And so I just wanted to share a few thoughts from that. I love this story because Peter and James and John, they just decide that it's time to go back to business as usual. They had this amazing experience with Jesus for a few years, and he died, and that's over with. And so it's just time to go back to life as usual. They had made some mistakes around this time. Peter, of course, denied Jesus 3 times in Jerusalem at a fire, and he doesn't know what else to do other than to go back to fishing. So they return to fishing. They're out on a boat, and they're not catching anything. And somebody from the shoreline says, "Put your nets in on the other side." So they do so, and Peter realizes that it's Jesus, that Jesus is on that shore. So Peter, being who Peter is, he throws himself into the water and he swims to the shore. He is so anxious to see Jesus. And Jesus has already prepared a fire. He's starting the preparations for breakfast that morning. And Peter, I imagine, smells that fire, and he is reminded of his betrayal of Jesus. So I wanted you to see this fire pit and to think about what Peter might have been thinking about in that moment. I love the smell of a good fire, and I especially love the smell of a good fire when I'm getting to roast marshmallows around it. But this might have been a painful moment for Peter to be reminded of the way that he betrayed Jesus. But the other disciples come along and they see Jesus, and he starts preparing this meal for them, and they're eating it and enjoying their breakfast together. And Peter is pulled aside by Jesus. And 3 times Jesus asks Peter, "Do you love me?" And each time, more passionately, Peter says, "Of course, Jesus, you know I love you." And Jesus responds, "Then you cannot do life in the old way. You cannot do life the way that you've always done it. I need you to tend my lambs, to feed my sheep, to care for my people, to continue the work of God's kingdom. Peter, you can't go back to life the way it used to be. You have to move forward." So I can't help but think about where we are in this time, where we are in life being slower. I've heard a lot of families talk about that they're sitting down with their children, enjoying dinner, that they're making dinner with their children. In life before this, life was so crazy and busy. There were sports practices and musical practices and all the things that we tend to fill our time up with. But families are sitting down and spending time together in a new way, or in an old way, perhaps. Or maybe you've been spending more time in personal devotion with God in this season, since things have been a little slower. Friends, what I think is happening is, despite the tragedy of this time, if we're really paying attention, God is calling us to something new. God is pulling us forward in a new way. But first, we need to spend our own time at the fire pit. We need to be reminded of the ways that maybe in our past life we were failing. We need to be reminded of the ways that we weren't paying attention to what God was doing in the world. God is calling us to a newness, to be a part of the kingdom and working in the kingdom in a new way once all of this is over. So I just want to invite each of us to spend a little time at our own type of fire pit, to spend some time in prayer with God, and to consider what it means to move forward, not to go back, but to keep pushing forward in God's love. Would you bow with me in prayer? God, we admit that this has been a hard time, that we miss friends, we miss family, we miss our church. But we're also claiming that we want to pay attention to what you might be calling us to. That you are calling us forward, not backward. But that means that we're also being called to a time of repentance. So help us to pay attention to where you are leading, where your kingdom is blooming and blossoming around us. We thank you for your presence with us, even when we are afraid, even when we are uncertain. But help us to have that boldness of Peter, and to dive into the water, and to follow